Hello and welcome to episode 91 of Linux After Dark. I'm Joe.
I'm Chris.
I'm Gary.
And I'm May.
Welcome back all. We recently talked about my offsite backup box and I wanted your advice on what it was going to be. And in the end, I didn't take anyone's advice. I just did my own thing, obviously. But then bitterly regretted it. So, I think I mentioned the J1800 machine that used to be my NAS. And that is now my offsite backup box. The plan was originally for that to be the onsite, but because of the way I wanted to do the encryption, I needed a machine for my onsite backup that was capable of doing the hardware accelerated AES stuff. So that J1800 was just not going to do it, basically. So I thought, rather than buy more computers, I've got too many, what can I do? Well, I've got this N100 box that I bought to prove failing wrong about Raspberry Pis, and maybe I could use that to record, and then my trusty 9900K machine, I could use that as the on-site backup. It's a bit overkill, but it's definitely going to do the job.
And in theory, that should be fine, right? Because the N100, as we've said many times, is about an 8th gen mobile i5 in benchmarks. Should be fine for recording a FLAC in Audacity and joining a Jitsi call.
Yeah. And it kind of was, but then I just started to have regrets. First of all, I've done a talk a few times, my Podcasting 101, and one of my slides says something like, don't change your recording machine, don't mess with it. Just get something that works and stick with it.
And we all live in fear of that, Joe, as co-presenters.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to get shouted at by me, so you don't do it. But I didn't follow my own advice. Well, before I actually put the 9900K into production as the on-site box, I did do a lot of tests on the N100, right? And it was mostly fine with a weird bug that when I first boot it with my audio interface connected, I have to mute and unmute the sound and then I can hear stuff. And I did actually try a cron job for that, but it messed up my routing and stuff because I have the left channel muted and the right channel full to go to my mixer. Anyway, never mind. It messed with that, so I couldn't automate it, which was really annoying. So I have to remember. But the problem really was that once we finished recording, you all send me your FLACs and I open them and have a quick look at them, check that they're all good, and then let you go on your way. I don't know what I would do if there was a problem. We'd have to re-record and that's just not going to happen. But that's almost a superstition at this point. I have to download it, check that it's all good. And it's just so painful to open FLACs on the N100 when you're used to a 9900K. I mean, the 9900K is not exactly cutting edge, is it? But it is a beefy box compared to an N100. So I just decided, no, it ain't it, I think, as the kids say. So I've ordered an HP 290 G2 MT.
Gesundheit.
Yeah, which is an 8th gen i5. And it came with 8 gigs of RAM and a 256 gig NVMe drive. I'm hoping it's got the relevant cables to connect the two spinning Rust drives, but that might be another adventure once it arrives later this week.
That was what I ended up on with the recommendation, and I still think it's a good way to go. I'm interested to hear from you how loud it is, because for me, it would be going under the TV
right,
all the time. So idle fan noise, I can take a bit of fan noise if it's scrubbing the ZFS mirror or it's doing something intensive. But generally, if it's too loud idling, that would be bad for me.
Right, whereas I don't give a shit. It's in network corner where I just never go, so it can make as much noise as it wants.
Is that like ThinkPad corner?
It's very much like ThinkPad corner, yeah.
All of my stuff sits in the garage, so it's well out of the way, and no one apart from me goes in there, so it can make as much noise as it likes.
We were discussing in our chat as well, it's an interesting dilemma when you look at these boxes, because you can get a 7th gen i5, which has the same iGPU, but 2 less cores per level. So i3 has 2 cores, whereas the 8th gen has 4, and i5 is 4 and 6. But you don't necessarily need it. The thing is, some people, we were looking at forum threads and things, the 6 cores will get the job done more quickly for intensive loads and have more efficient up and down C states. So there's all these little decisions to make, and then finding one with the right drive bays and then the fan noise. But we're talking I know you couldn't find them, Joe, but I looked again today. There are 7th gen ones for 39 quid with offers accepted. It's becoming really cheap for these boxes and they will absolutely do the job. But then I started looking at the venerable J5005, and it's not that far behind the 7th gen i5. So the J5005 is what's in a Wise 5070 Pentium model. So acquiring hardware, there's almost too many choices and too many things to think about. It can become quite a rabbit hole.
Yeah. Well, thank you everyone who wrote in, by the way, with suggestions. There were various people suggesting essentially this machine that I've ended up ordering. I mean, it's not arrived yet. It could be a complete turkey, but we'll soon see. I'll have to report back. But we sat down to record today, and I connected to the call, and I couldn't hear anything. All right, yeah, mute, unmute. And we were talking, and then all of a sudden, I just couldn't hear you all, and then I just couldn't hear you all. I tried rebooting, I tried unplugging, replugging, all sorts of stuff. In the end, had to go and get another laptop to record on. So the N100 is just sitting there, staring at me, saying, ha, 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 you shouldn't have got rid of the 9900K, Joe. What did I tell you? So, yeah, I just fucked that M100, quite frankly, after today. Just the stressful running up and downstairs trying to find a laptop. And I'm connected over Wi-Fi now rather than Ethernet. It's just not been ideal.
Now, before a certain chuckling co-host of one of our other shows starts going, I told you so, right? I want you to do the same thing on a Raspberry Pi 5 and see how you get on.
Well, indeed. But I think a big part of the problem is that the 9900K was running 2204 and not 2404. And the M100, I assume I have to run 2404 on that. I know, probably not. Maybe I could do 22. But anyway, I've had that problem with the muting and unmuting before on 2404. So what I'm tempted to do when I get my 9900K back is install Ubuntu 2204 and enable Ubuntu Pro on it.
Yes, the tech debt that Joe collates for this show.
Yeah, exactly. Do I really want to take on more tech debt? Because it was working perfectly, like just flawlessly. Just hundreds of recordings over the last, 2 or 3 years or more with that box has been perfect. And then I fuck with it and it all goes wrong.
But here's the difficulty, right? The 9900K came out in 2018. The N100 came out in 2023. So if you went back to 2204 on the N100, you're breaking the golden rule by a year in reverse.
Yeah, exactly. That's not an option.
There's an HWE kernel.
That's true.
Yeah, true. But I'm talking about when I get the 9900K back. I know that it's solid with 2204, but do I really want to take on that tech debt?
I think you need to probably install 2204 and then also have a separate disk with a newer version on that you try and work out what the problem is, because you can't stay on 2204 forever, right?
But let's be clear, it's still supported for the main packages until 2027. Sure, it's not the latest LTS, but it's not a dead LTS. The Ubuntu elements are only 3 years of support. So yeah, they're out of date now in terms of being unsupported.
Well, nearly, yeah.
Well, April. But the main packages, it's still a supported LTS. That's the whole idea. It's a 5-year support model.
Yeah, and my browser is a Snap, which is getting automatically updated.
So it's not that bad.
Yeah, and my Audacity version doesn't change, which is a massive plus.
Well, let me flip the question on the head and ask, is this not just an appliance at this point? Does it even matter?
Well, it is connected to the network, so yes.
Well, 2027, that matters, but it doesn't matter now, I don't think.
You're not logging into your bank and stuff on it, right? I mean, yeah, it matters more in 2027, but equally, I've seen places still using like a G5 Power Mac for recording because they've got some ancient Firewire interface that only works with the G5 Mac, and they just leave it on an isolated network. It can get out to the bits it needs to get out to and nothing more.
Joe shouldn't ask me because I help people try and compile software from 2006, quite a lot of work. I mean, I tell them it's a terrible idea, but they tell me it's the only gold standard for this area of scientific research. So I'm going to keep quiet from now on.
Yeah, see my weekly use of a Power Mac G5 for an example of that.
If I was just recording music stuff, then that would be fine. But I'm connected to the network, I have to transfer files to the NAS all the time. I don't want to use something that is horribly out of date.
2204 isn't a problem for that. like Chris said, for another 3 or 4 years, right? It's probably fine.
There's going to be a whole nother LTS before then, everything going well.
Yeah, maybe it'll just be fixed in 2604.
Yeah, maybe.
But you've broken your golden rule of changing something that worked, which is, I think, is sort of partly superstitious. I had to change the recording machine we use for this because suddenly I got USB interference gremlins on the interface. And I was terrified. I was like, I really hope that just whatever I replace it with works. And now it works. This thing is not getting changed. I'm not changing what's installed on it. I'm not changing how it's set up. This is the machine and it will be what I get out. And that's it.
We'll just ignore the fact that I change recording machine about every other week. And, Joe hasn't noticed yet.
Today on Joe Experiences Confirmation Bias.
I have noticed, Gary, and I'm waiting for the day that I have to tell you off, but so far you've delivered a perfectly fine FLAC. I mean, the levels change every time. Sometimes it's a little bit clipped and I have to fix that, but, you've not completely failed yet, so you're getting away with it for now.
I've delivered you a FLAC that has my voice in every week for the last 4 years. What can I say?
So the plan is that the 9900K goes back into the main slot, Joe, and then this super HP box is going to fulfill the role that it was going to fulfill.
Yes, that's going to be the on-site backup.
Right.
Oh yeah, and I forgot to say, if you want to hear the details of the ZFS setup, then check out 2.5 Admins episode 237, where we kind of went into detail about how I set it up, going from the NAS to the on-site to the off-site, and all the kind of stuff I had to learn for that. So I'll put a link in the show notes. Okay, this episode is sponsored by people who support us with PayPal and Patreon. Go to linuxafterdark.net/support for details of how you can support us too. Patreon supporters have the option to listen to episodes without ads like this. And it's not just this show. There's Late Night Linux for news, discoveries, audience input, and misanthropy, 2.5 Admins about system administration, Linux Matters for upbeat, family-friendly adventures, Linux Dev Time about developing with and for Linux, Hybrid Cloud Show for everything private and public cloud, and Ask the Hosts for off-topic questions from you. You can even get some episodes a bit early. We've got a lot going on, and it's only possible because of the people who support us. So if you like what we do and can afford it, it would be great if you could support us too at linuxafterdark.net/support. Let's do some feedback then. Mike writes, I think promoting a FOSS computing experience is morally right, but if you look at everything wrong with society or computing, it's absurd to make this battle a priority. Fighting homelessness and hunger, supporting local libraries, volunteering for literacy programs, working against planned obsolescence, even just getting people to stop reusing passwords, all of that matters way more. The terrible thing about criticizing people for using the wrong technology tool is that it doesn't take any work on the critic's part. Oh yeah, the easiest job in the world is criticizing someone else's work or choices or whatever.
Yeah, that's it. We spoke about the Stack Overflow survey and it comes up in my job quite a bit. And, we find VS Code annoying because we administer servers and people spin it up and they don't know what's happening in the background. But you can't just take it away from them completely. And lots of people use it. It's a 75% of the professional developers polled situation. As much as we would like to be more purist about it, because I have lots of concerns. Like, it's an open marketplace of extensions that is really badly vetted for security. Now, if you know what you're doing, you're not going to mess that up. But at the same time, we're not going to go hell for leather and really say, oh, you're doing it wrong, because ultimately it's code. Does the code that comes out function? It's a bit difficult now because of all the AI stuff that's going into it, which makes me a bit troubled.
And for the fact of it maybe being better to do other things, while I certainly don't have a ethics degree, there is some argument for doing the most good with your life, if you subscribe to that theory. And a lot of times, open source software can just be a part of that. A lot of times it isn't, let's be clear, because a lot of times it'd be easier to just set up, some small nonprofit with Google Drive or something, and that might genuinely be the better thing to do. But if you do carry the knowledge that we have with us, you can end up in situations where it's like, actually, Nextcloud is the best solution for this, and also the most ethical solution. Depending on what the Nextcloud company's doing these days. I haven't looked at them lately, actually. So maybe we should use that.
And Mike mentioned planned obsolescence. Well, just look at the hundreds of millions, if not a billion laptops that are just going to get dumped. Well, in reality, they'll just keep using it with Windows 10, but eventually they'll get dumped when you could install Linux on those and prolong their life.
It's a really tricky problem, isn't it? Like, there are several charities I work with that are still using computers from 2010, 2012, and getting volunteers to understand that that computer is an appliance is sometimes really difficult. You're not signing into your personal email on that machine. You're booting it up and playing some background music or running a presentation or something. And actually, the computer from 2012 that stopped getting security updates 2 years ago is probably okay for that task. It's a really, really tricky balancing act, isn't it? And it's similar with your example, May, of setting them up with Nextcloud. Sure, I could set those charities up with Nextcloud, but equally, if I were to get hit by a bus tomorrow, they're screwed. So I'm much more tempted to just set them up with Google Drive and enable them to do the rest of the good that I feel they're doing for the world and be a bit more pragmatic about it.
It's tricky to get people to adopt things that we take for granted as well. I regularly used to see computers filled with malware from people going to YouTube downloader sites. You know, you Google download a video from YouTube. Obviously, that's ripe on the SEO tree for malware delivery. But then you try to explain to people, well, there's YTDLP. They're like, I'm sorry, what? And you're like, yeah, it's just, you just pass it these flags. I'm sorry, what? They don't want that. And of course, there are like open source wrappers that can provide a more familiar interface. But you can't blame people. It's easy to get really lost in the fact that all this stuff is just obvious to us. When you actually speak to people, that is a high friction option compared to Googling a website and finding it. And that doesn't mean you have to slight them. I think you just have to put things in the way of people regularly rather than try and aggressively advocate, because that just backfires. They're just like, I'm not interested in this. I want to talk about something else. Whereas if you're a bit more pragmatic and they're like, why, sometimes people say, why do you seem to not have a problem with this? And you say, well, it's because of these things, and try and introduce it a bit more gently without judging them for where they are.
I think the XKCD, you're one of today's lucky 10,000 is really the answer there. Mm. Oh man, I get to explain something super cool to you.
Yes.
And take it as an opportunity, but, don't mansplain, whatever.
Yeah, that's it.
Mike says it's absurd to make this battle a priority, but you have to pick your battles, don't you?
Mm.
And yeah, there are a lot of problems in the world, and promoting a FOSS computing experience isn't a top priority and shouldn't be a top priority, but it's not doing any harm in the world, is it?
And also it starts to, if you just keep tapping the door lightly, suddenly, I don't know, a major social network gets taken over by someone and everyone's flooding for an alternative. You put those things in front of people and you never know. Eventually they'll be like, oh, wow, remember that thing you talked to me about ages ago? What can we do now? So yeah, I think it's important, but it doesn't have to be the end of everything all the time.
Yeah, but then the Fediverse is too hard. We'll just go to Blue Sky instead. That'll be fine.
Well, I was just going to say, as that left my mouth, trying to explain to someone about defederation who really isn't in the mindset is quite something.
There is certainly something to be said about doing the most good that you can do. And if that means doing something that you enjoy so that you actually do it, it's much like, what's the best way to prepare vegetables? The way that you'll eat them.
Mm.
And similarly, I think it's okay to advocate for something like that and not be upset when it's potentially not the solution. I've had many conversations over the last 6 months about replacing some old Macs with a Linux box that is running a piece of open source software to do presentations. But it hasn't really been the answer, because am I going to train a group of 20 volunteers to use a new piece of software? Am I going to go and replace the SDI Blackmagic video card thing that charity has with something that's going to work on Linux? No, and that's okay. And they can just continue using the old Mac. And it's not a battle that I want to fight in the grand scheme of things.
Right, well, we better get out of here then. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, but until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Chris.
I've been Gary.
And I've been May.
See you later.